How to train for a world record bench press. Had a client compete recently and she set the world record for the bench press in her weight class, 67.5 kilograms. She weighed 145 pounds on weigh-ins and then she benched 249 pounds. Amazing. Awesome job. So that is a world record. Pretty cool. And we actually started working together from her first ever powerlifting meet all the way till now. And in today's video, what I wanted to do was discuss the training strategy and structure that we use in order to grow her bench press. Now, I've worked with her from first meet all the way to an elite total. She actually has elite total in 4 weight classes, which is amazing. But I've worked with other people the same way, all the way from the first powerlifting meet to an elite total. We've set a ton of national records, a ton of state records. And the strategies that I've used with this client to build the world record are the same strategies and concepts that I want to share in today's podcast and that I've used with other athletes to increase their bench press as well. Now, I want to talk about the concepts related to how I structure them with my clients. However, for every single client, I do an individual program. There isn't a one way that fits all approach to bench press training, but there are some common concepts that I do like to implement. I want to point that out in that you're going to find a lot of people who have world records and they have various training styles. And that's because you have to find the style that matches that athlete. There isn't a prescriptive program that if everybody follows, they'll eventually get there. There is just genetic components to it. There's also individual differences and things that we're going to talk about, such as managing recovery capacity. If you properly manage recovery capacity, you get to train more, you get to make faster and bigger adaptations, and eventually you get stronger. So with that client, for example, she was sleeping 8 to 10 hours every single night, even though she's a business owner, mother of 6, competitive athlete, a coach herself, tons of responsibilities, but she was still making sure that she was doing what she needed to address recovery capacity. And that is one component among many that we're going to talk about that people don't often think of when they're trying to become their best, is that not only do we want to give our best to training, but we need to give our best to the adaptation process, which is when we actually get the benefits of our efforts from training. That's when our body actually makes the changes that make us stronger. Now, I've helped this client from first meet all the way to elite, helped a bunch of other athletes from first meet all the way to elite totals. And the general structure that I do like to use is at least 4 training days a week if they can fit it in. And that is, we squat on the first day, bench on the second, and that's usually our heavier competition style bench press or our highly technical bench press, whatever we're working on in that moment. Then we have a deadlift day, and then we have another kind of bench accessory day. Now, I have some clients, they train only 3 days a week. That's fine. I have other clients that train 5 days, even 6 days a week. I'm not a big fan of training 6 days a week when you're a strength athlete. It's just a lot of beating up the body. There's not a lot of time to make the adaptations and changes that you want. My preference is 4. However, if they like to train a little more often for emotional and mental health management, totally fine. I understand. We'll make it work. Usually what we do is if we have a 5th day, we'll do the squat, the bench, and then that's our 3rd day is our kind of like in-between day. And that is a lot of small isolated movements, a lot of weakness aspects. So we might be working on machine adductor, abductor, Copenhagen planks, various things that work the internal, external rotators of the hips. We might do a lot of core work. Maybe we're going to work on some lats that help stabilize our squat, our bench, and our deadlift. We're going to do maybe even condition, some GPP work, some general physical preparedness to work on aerobic conditioning, which helps them recover between their major lifts, and it helps overall just health. So that way we can manage blood pressure and some other health markers as well. So that extra day is a little bit of a catch-all for all the small stuff that we do fit in on the bigger days, but maybe we want a little extra volume on those things. So that is our normal routine, is squat, bench, deadlift, bench, and that's typically our full week. Now, when we look at our bench variations, I don't always do just the competition style bench. When I have people who are newer to training, we do that for sure because they need to develop technique, and I'll modify what we do leading into the bench and what we do after the bench, but I'll keep the bench press the competition style if they need to learn the commands, if they need to learn more consistency with their technique. But in this client's case, she's advanced, obviously world record, so we don't have to do a ton of competition style work. We can fluctuate with that and use other variants of our main bench work. However, if you're ever uncertain, then what you should do, competition bench is definitely the #1 priority, and you would do that until there was absolutely no technical flaws whatsoever. What I thought was really cool for this client, she was nicknamed the Technician at her powerlifting meet, which is a super awesome, exciting, wonderful nickname because her and I both work together by watching videos, and I give feedback. She tells me how she's feeling, what she feels, and we work on making everything absolutely crisp and perfect all the time. We do not accept any breakdown of technique. If we see that, we do not move up in weight. We do not move up or progress in any other thing that we're doing. We hone in, figure out what happened, fix it, and then move on. So we never, ever, ever, ever sacrifice good technique. Even when we're doing near 1 rep maxes in training, I don't even remember the last time she failed a lift. Like, I was talking with one of my other clients who's a competitive CrossFit athlete. We've worked for 5 years together to get her like for the CrossFit Games each year, and she said in 5 years she's only missed 3 lifts. So we very rarely, if ever, miss lifts, and part of the reason why is we're always lifting to a technique quality that is so freaking perfect that if they ever did get overextended in that moment, maybe they had poor sleep, high stress, poor nutrition, poor hydration, just whatever, they didn't come in that day feeling their best. They're so for example, these clients, I rate the weights I want them to use. So I actually literally write, if I want her to, bench 225 for 3 sets of 3, I write that in there. And that's my job to pick weights that she can absolutely do. We're not going to miss all the time. That's on me to make sure I do that, and I do it pretty well. So with that, we're always doing those lifts so technically perfect that if she did need to kind of grind a lift or move a little bit or squirm a little bit to finish something, we have that capacity built in to do that for like 1 rep if we need it, but we never use that. We never rely on it. So if you're thinking of like an RPE scale, rate of perceived exertion, people will often talk about like if the scale kind of starts for most people at 5. As 5 is you're moving, but it's not difficult at all. 6, still not that difficult. 7, it's starting to have a little bit of a burn, a little bit of a challenge, but not that big of a deal. But you can definitely tell it's something more than nothing. 8 is, okay, yeah, that was really hard. But I could do it perfect, and I could do more if I needed to. 9 was extremely hard. I was on the edge of losing technique. I don't know if I could really do more. And then 10 out of 10 would be is you barely survived the lift. You may have died a little bit, but you made it. We are almost always only at 8s and 9s. I tell my clients, for example, if we're going to use an RPE scale, is that they should always be at 8s, where it feels very heavy, but if they were to film themselves to show a client of theirs, this is how the lift should look, that it should look like a tutorial lift. It's not so light that like they're just curling a 5-pound dumbbell and saying this is what it should look like. It's like, yeah, of course it's going to look like that if it's only 5 pounds. We want something that's heavy enough that it looks impressive and it was challenging to them, but it also looks so good technique quality wise that it could stand alone as a tutorial video. So that's one of the ways I kind of think of it, and I just realized over half the people I work with are coaches. So if you're not a coach, you might not think of sharing that video with a client because you don't have clients. But if you were to share that on social media and you're like, oh, I wonder if anybody's going to pick me apart for having bad technique, well, you should be able to post that and feel confident that, hey, my technique was pretty damn good there. I don't think anybody's going to be able to say anything negatively about my technique. So that would be another way to think through it. Now, that's the type of intensity that we do on our main lifts all the time. So that is definitely something you want to keep in mind, is that technique quality, in my opinion, is the most important component out of anything and everything that we do is if we're going to do it, we have to do it perfect. If we do it perfect, that ingrains in our body that autopilot of how to do that movement. We can develop maximum efficiency. And whenever we get nervous at competitions, our autopilot just kicks into gear and we do the lift absolutely perfect because that's the way we always practiced it. One of my funny stories for this that I share with clients is my first ever powerlifting meet. I had never trained in a singlet. So I did all my training, got to the meet, put a singlet on, and while I was warming up, I never put the shoulder straps on because, it didn't seem like it was necessary. So I had the singlet on the bottom part of me, just a regular t-shirt underneath, and I was doing all my benching. And then when I went up for my first attempt in front of the judges, I put the shoulder straps on. And then when I laid down to do the bench press, I didn't realize how uncomfortable the singlet was in the groin area. So when I laid back to get under the bar, I was getting my hands set and I brought the bar out. I held the bar in place, brought it down, paused on my chest, lifted, paused, and racked. The entire time I was just thinking, holy freaking crap, this is really uncomfortable. My belly's sticking out more than, my other parts. I probably look horrible. This is the worst aesthetic look ever in the world. This is so uncomfortable. I can't even tell you if the judge gave me cues. So when the judge said press, I don't even remember hearing it. When they said rack, I don't even remember hearing it. I had just always practiced with unracking, taking a big deep breath, coming down to my chest, pausing, pressing, pausing, and then racking. So I had always practiced with the commands in place. So then even at the meet, when I wasn't even paying attention to the commands, I actually ended up following the commands by accident. So that was a good example of how we want our practice to be so perfect, because when there are things that come into play that we can't control, if we've already controlled the controllables, then the uncontrollables are going to have less of a negative impact on us. So I got a little off on a side tangent there, but technique should always be number one. So when you're thinking of what to do, competition style benching would always be a great variation of bench to use because that's going to help you develop your technique the best. The other variations I'll use with clients, it depends on their anatomy. If they have short upper arm bones or long upper arm bones, that tends to change whether they're chest dominant or tricep dominant in their bench press. Some people are a blend of both, but it's more so common. You're going to find people that like edge a little bit into one versus the other. They might be 60-40, 70-30, blah, 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 where they may be more chest dominant or more tricep dominant. For this client, she has short upper arm bones, so we just hammer a ton of triceps. Just triceps, 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 triceps. We do enough chest to where the chest isn't going to be a weakness for us, meaning we're not going to be a risk of injury, but we know it's not the main mover. So it just needs to be strong enough to stabilize and be involved with, not going to really stabilize, but the chest needs to be strong enough to not get injured in the lift, I guess would be a way of saying that. But our main mover is going to be our triceps. Especially the shorter the femur, upper arm bone is, the humerus. The shorter and shorter that is, the more and more tricep dominant the person's going to be. The longer their upper arm bone is, the more chest dominant they're going to be. So we're going to do a lot of chest flies, every variation you can think of, whether that's cable flies, machine flies, dumbbell floor flies. I really like dumbbell floor flies and floor presses, which I got the idea of that from Josh Bryant. If you follow Jailhouse Strong on social media, you'll see Josh Bryant, amazing coach for strength. So I steal every idea he has. I practice them and see which one works best for which clients. But I do a lot of floor work because then you can't get overextended in that. So you really are protecting your pec a lot from injury. But for main bench variations, that's kind of what we play around with is, if this person needs more of a tricep dominant press, we're going to think of close grip work. We're going to think of Spoto presses. Eric Spoto at one point in time held the raw bench press world record, and he was notable because he would bring the bar down and pause about 2 inches off his chest and then press back up. He never actually deloaded the bar into his chest. He liked keeping the constant tension in the arms, which he felt really developed his arm strength, also his shoulder stabilization and his body bracing and leg pressure. So he was never able to release anything because the weight was just constantly on him at all times. So I really like Spoto presses for all of those benefits, especially for tricep development. But even if a person's learning how to develop leg pressure, I like the term leg pressure, not leg drive, because leg pressure is consistent pressure at all times through the legs. That's exactly what we want. We don't want a leg drive where the person, does a hip thrust at the bottom of the bench and their butt comes flying off the bench. So we want leg pressure the whole way through the bench. Now, Spoto press is great for that. I'll also have athletes do Larson press. Larson press refers to an athlete who was, I think it's paraplegic. Now I can't remember the term, but his lower body didn't work from nerve damage, nerve injury. So he would compete in bench, but he had to be kind of strapped down with his torso, and his legs were just extended out, and they didn't really provide anything. There was no leg pressure, no leg drive, no nothing. So the entire lift becomes very upper body dominant. So I like using that for clients that need to develop more, not only like tricep power, tricep explosiveness, but also just more overall upper body growth. So that's another thing we consider when we're deciding on what main bench variations to do. We talked about anatomy being a thing. Is if they're short upper arm bones, you're going to pick more tricep dominant presses. If they're long upper arm bones, you're going to pick more chest dominant presses. An example of that would be like a wide grip press or like a clavicle press. You'll see people do those as well. But the other thing we'll look at is, does this person need to grow? Do we need a growth stimulus or do we need a strength-based stimulus? If they're already at the top of their weight class, we don't really need to grow muscle tissue. So I'm going to minimize eccentric loads. I'm going to work on more technical positions. I'm not going to aim for as much muscular stress and damage as I would for an athlete that needs to grow into their weight class. So those are some considerations I would think through whenever I'm trying to decide, okay, what variation of bench press do I want this person to work on? Now, in our workouts, I'll have them do a movement prep first, and that's usually on upper body days, something that kind of warms up the shoulder joint and our thoracic spine to get them ready to pull their scapula, their shoulder blades together and down so they're nice and braced for the bench press. We typically will do some type of core stimulus, and depending on the person, sometimes I'll also do a little bit of a leg or glute-based stimulus as well so they can have their legs primed to be able to feel that leg pressure when they do the bench. Now, sometimes we'll go right from that into our main bench work. Other times I might pre-exhaust them. So maybe I'll have them do chest flies before they do their bench press, or some type of tricep work before they do their bench press. If we're in that phase, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, where we use overloading and underloading phases as progressions in the off season leading into competitions. But all of this, I'm rambling quite a bit, but hopefully this is somewhat helpful, is all of these things are what I would factor into the decisions of what type of main bench press variation to use. So if I'm looking down at my notes, is we covered the strength component, we covered anatomy, and we covered technique. So we covered anatomy, meaning, do they need a tricep dominant or chest dominant? And then technique would be, so they need more time under the competition variation, or can we use other variations as well? And then a third note that I had was, what is their strength levels? If they're already really strong, meaning they're benching over their body weight, then I typically am going to use underloaded variations of bench press, not overloaded variations. So that means I'm going to use variations of bench press that feel harder at lighter than their competition style work. So for this client, if her best bench is 249, we would use variations that require less than 249 pounds in order to elicit good technique, kind of on the edge of good technique failure. We don't actually let our technique fail, but maximum intensity. Let's go with that. So we're going to use a variation that is under her competition weight for maximum intensity, the stronger the person is. The weaker the person is, meaning they're struggling to maybe bench their body weight or they can bench less, we're going to use a ton of overload variations. And that's going to be a lot of reverse banding if they have the ability for that, maybe slingshot bench presses. We're going going to use just any freaking variation that gets more weight on their bones and tissues than what their competition bench typically would allow. So if a person is struggling, I'm just making up a number, say 225 is their current max, and they would like to get to 250. Well, maybe they weigh 200, 225. So for them, I'm going to definitely need an overload variation. I'm going to use reverse band benching if we can set that up in a rack. We're going to use slingshot work if we can do that. I'll also do a ton of, this is going to be quite interesting, is we do a ton of cycles of pre-exhaust, where if they're a chest dominant presser, I'll have them do chest flies, and then I'll have them do their bench press work. And we might do that for 4 to 8 weeks, depending on where we're at in their season, with getting ready for competition or not. We might do a pre-exhaust with chest isolation work, and then all of a sudden we drop off that isolation, and now they go back into their bench more fresh, and that allows them to push a little bit of heavier weight. So that is actually a separate technique from underloading, overloading exercise variation selections, is we can also use pre-exhaust to modify the loading feel of the main bench variation we get. And so if we're using a main bench variation and I want it to feel harder than it should feel, but I can't have it be heavier because maybe we're limited with recovery capacity, or they're working through a shoulder, elbow, or wrist injury or issue. Well, okay, how can I get this load to feel heavier than normal if I can't load it heavier than normal due to that issue? You can use pre-exhaust. So you can pre-exhaust the dominant muscle. Like I said, if they're dominant chest, you would pre-exhaust chest. If they're dominant tricep, you pre-exhaust tricep. And then you have them do their bench work. And then at lighter weights, it's actually still going to feel maximally intensity. And that's going to allow them to be able to put in the best effort they can ever put in at a lighter weight load, which helps them protect that injury and gives more recovery capacity to that issue. So there's a lot of, to me, it's super fun because you can plug and play and pull and push on all these little elements on how you want to structure just even that section of the workout. Now, when we look at bench accessories, we have similar considerations. Is how strong are they? If they're really strong and we happen to be doing maybe a competition style bench, we know that that's going to beat them up. That's going to cause really like maximum tissue stress, connective tissue, muscle tissue stress. So maybe in their accessories, I might underload the accessories. So you might do, say, dumbbell skull crushers rather than weighted dips. Whereas maybe they're in a season where I'm pre-exhausting the main lift, I'm using an underloaded main lift. So now when we come into the accessories, I know I have way more recovery capacity because I underutilize the recovery capacity on the first two elements. So then I know I have more to give in the accessories, so maybe then I'll do weighted dips, something that's much more aggressive, more of an overloaded variation, more of a stress level variation. So you can play with pre-exhaust or not to modify CNS stress, tissue stress. You can then modify the main bench variation, whether it's overload, normal loading, or underloading, and you can modify the accessories, whether that's overloading, normal loading, or underloading. And then you can have all three of those in place where it's all underload or it's all overload, which I wouldn't do because you're going to kill the person, or a variation and sequencing through those. What I'll find is some of my lifters, like one lifter, for example, he competes at about 155 pounds and has a 1,500 pound total. So we're closing in on a 10x total. He's done a 10x total in training. We just need to put that together on meet day. We'll get there. So for him, his main lifts are so taxing on him. Think about somebody 155 pounds squatting over 500 pounds in training. That's super taxing. So the accessories that we do are all underload accessories, very underload accessories. Sometimes they're just bodyweight explosive style movements and I don't even weight them because that big lift is so demanding that they don't need heavy accessories. Whereas I have other competitors, like my mom, for example, she has competed in over 10 powerlifting meets. She holds national records for 2 different weight classes. And she was somebody who I started her first ever lifting at 47. She touched her first weight. We did 3 bodybuilding shows at 50, 51, and 54, I think. And then she got into powerlifting and ended up setting all these national records, which is pretty cool. So for her bench press, she weighs around, she competes around 148, and she can bench press around 165. Now she's 67, 68 years old. That's pretty good. That's good even if you're in your 20s. But she's benching over her body weight. For her, what we found is that is heavy but it's not heavy enough. She still needs heaviness in her accessories. So we do a lot of heavy dumbbell presses. It's just a basic raw movement that forces her to stabilize things. She finds it super, she gets really fired up to do them. One of our goals is whenever she turns 60 was that we wanted to press the 60-pound dumbbells for 10 reps. Well, she did. Now, 8 years later, she's still pressing the 60s for 10 reps, and recently we just tried the 65s, which I think she got for 4 or 5 reps. So really badass. But for her, for an example, is she needs heavy accessories. Whereas the other person, the other client at the 155 weight class, he does not. If we did heavy accessories, it would crush him. And then we have the athlete here who did the world record. She's kind of a mix in the middle. Is the accessories have to be properly paired with her main variation to make sure we don't overstress anything. So if I normal load or overload the main variation, I would absolutely underload the accessories and vice versa. So that's something to think of, is like the strength of the person. The stronger they are, often the lighter the accessories need to be, or even just less total volume. Instead of 3 working sets, we might only do 1 working set. Then the other thing we look at is also anatomy. If they're a tricep dominant presser, we're going to use more tricep accessories. If they're a chest dominant presser, we're going to use more chest accessories. Then we look at their need in regards to, for further development. Do we need just more neurological development, which is strength-based development? Do we need to build up a singular technique aspect? Maybe they're forgetting their leg pressure. So we're going to do dumbbell chest presses where instead of laying on the bench, the normal way, they're going to lay sideways where only their shoulders are touching the bench and their hips are free floating. So they have to maintain good leg pressure the whole time they're doing dumbbell presses, and that's going to make them more aware of leg pressure. Or they might need growth. So maybe they need to grow into a weight class. So we're going to use more eccentric loading. We're going to use more time under tension. We're going to use more variations that elicit a growth response rather than being super technical and precision into a singular muscle. So this is, for me, it's super fun and nuanced, and why I love writing programming. It's also why I love doing one-on-one custom programming. That's the only thing I do, is customized programming. I've tried to do templated, like, hey, if everybody in the world wants to be a bikini athlete, here's a great program for you. I hate doing it. I hate it. Because it's only going to be right for some of the people doing it, and then the people on this end, it's not going to be correct. It's going to be too much, and then people on this end, it's going to be too little, and everybody buys the program thinking it's going to lead them to X, but it's not going to, and then that just makes me disappointed, and that I'm disappointing other people. So one of the ways, the analogies I use is if somebody asks me, how do you drive to New York? Like, what are the directions to get to New York City? I would need to know where the hell you're starting. So if I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, but you live in Cleveland, Ohio, those are going to be ridiculously different directions. So when everybody's buying a program for, say, bench press, you want to bench press a world record. Well, where are you starting? Are you starting with short upper arms or long upper arms? Are you starting with strength, above your body weight or below your body weight? Are you starting at the top of your weight class or at the bottom of the weight class? Or maybe you have some fat to lose and we actually need to drop some weight down into a weight class, so then you're actually more competitive at that lower weight class. Everybody's starting somewhere else. I don't know I can't give you directions to get there if I don't know where the hell you're starting. And then wherever I find out where you're starting, then I want to start to write the directions. That makes sense, right? So if you're starting to drive from Cleveland, Ohio, I want to start the directions from your driveway. How do you get from your driveway maybe out of your neighborhood? How do you get out of your neighborhood to out of your city? How do you get out of your city to out of your state? It just makes sense. That programming needs to be individual specific. So that's why I write the programming this way. And you can hear in all these nuances and things, I'm only touching on 3 categories. My gosh, there's probably a dozen. I'm only touching on a few things that can have this much variability when you're writing programming. So I wanted to share some of these concepts. I'm definitely rambling way too much, but I wanted to share some of these concepts so that way people can understand that there's a lot of play that you can have within your programming structure. Some of the things, like I said, that are consistent is we typically bench twice a week. Depends on the person. If they have bad shoulders or some kind of like lumbar issues, maybe they're a really high arch bench presser, and we know that we're going to use their lower back and squat and deadlift, that's going to have some stress there. I might not have them do a competition bench on that second bench day because we just don't need any more arching on the lower back. So we might do a non-arch style bench press, which might be like a Larson press. So that would be a variation that we might differ from, but that's typically our routine. Is squat is one workout, bench, then deadlift, then bench again, or bench accessories. We talked about the other concepts we have is that it's good to know, am I tricep dominant or chest dominant? And then I want to pick the variation that builds my dominance, but then I want to pick accessories that build that dominance as well. So that way, if I'm a tricep dominant presser, I want to beat the hell out of my triceps and really rely on them. Now, when I think about the other muscle, like if you think about, okay, if I'm tricep dominant, how much do I train my chest? One of the ways you can kind of think of it is 1/3 versus 2/3. So when we're looking at the stimulus that we have within the workout, that is a progressive style stimulus, meaning it's not just movement prep. It's not a warm up or something. It's actual like hard work. You have the main lift variation, then you have your accessories. Out of those, like probably about 1/3 to 1/4 should be for the weak muscle, and then 2/3 to 3/4 should be for the dominant muscle. So that's something you can consider on when you're doing exercise selection on how to break those up. I found that to be very helpful, works really well. If you do 50-50, you're just inefficient. You're trying to strengthen the thing that's never going to be strong, and you're undertraining the thing that is a strong thing. So I don't really like 50-50. So I do favor more of like a 1/3 to 2/3 kind of split on the dominance of triceps versus chest. And then we talked about accessories. Do you need to overload or underload based on the main work? If my main work is super heavy, I need less heavy accessories that are still challenging but less heavy. So it might be, like I said, a dumbbell skull crusher versus a weighted dip. A dumbbell skull crusher is going to be challenging but much less stressful on the body than a heavy weighted dip would be. And then we talked about the need for growth. So if you need to build muscle, you're going to pick accessories that have longer time under tension, more like eccentric loads. So that would be something you consider as well. Now, when I think about the three main tips, piece of advice that I want to leave you with in this podcast, number one is that technique quality matters absolutely most. If the lift looks ugly, do not progress in weight, reps, anything. Fix that. Repeat that over and over and over and over until it looks perfect. I've had clients where, like I have a CrossFit client right now, she's working on strength, and she sent me videos last week, let's say like 4 weeks ago, I think it was like 4 weeks ago, she squatted 75 kilogram, then 80 kilogram and 80 kilogram. And what we're working on is rooting the feet and getting external rotation of the femur on the way down, so that way she can get better glute engagement, which is going to give her more stabilization, more strength on the way up. So that's going to be a big component for her in her squats. Well, on the 75 kilogram, she looked okay, but she went down really fast. And it's questionable so fast that it's like, did you really get time to build that rooting of the feet, that external rotational tension? And then on the 80 kilogram and the 80 kilogram sets, the second and third set, she kind of sort of did it, but the knees caved in a little bit and it just didn't look quite as crisp as I wanted. So I was like, hey, next week, let's just repeat the same. She did it, looked a little better, but not quite perfect. So I said, hey, third week in a row, let's just do the same weights. Same thing happened. So fourth week in a row, let's do the same thing. The fourth week, both 80 kilogram sets looked much cleaner. The knees didn't cave and everything looked really good. Now, you might say is, well, if she just repeated the same weights for 4 weeks, how is she making any progressions? Well, that was just the main lift. We still had her accessories. Her accessories were working on the glutes, external rotational concepts, whether, hip circle, like sumo stance, very uprighted, kettlebell deadlifts in a deficit. We were doing a lot of GHD work. So we had the accessories built in that they were going to progress her baseline of strength. So that way, even if we're repeating the weight loads on the main lift, she has those accessories that are driving progression. And then we're using the main lift to utilize that new development and progression, but applying it back to the technical aspects that we need. So that was really important for her, is that it's okay to repeat the same weight over and over again until the technique is perfect, because you have other drivers of progress. So don't think of it as, if I'm repeating the same weight, I'm not going to make any progress. Yes, you will. You absolutely will. So technique matters most. Absolutely, by far, anything you ever post on social media, it should look super freaking crisp. It should almost be like the number one comment you get is, why didn't you put more weight on the bar? All the time. So all my clients will get that, and they might be laughing if they hear this, I see that in their comments, in their video sections all the time. If somebody's like, put some weight on the bar, coach, or like, oh, why didn't you do more? And that's okay. So we want to lift to the best of our technical ability and not an ounce past that. And let the adaptation from workout to workout, from the main lift, from the accessories, from the maybe positional and mobility benefits we get from the movement prep, let all that stuff do its work, and we'll make that progress slow and steady over time. Tip number 2 is to use undulating waves. It's a fancy term for just cycling overloaded, underloaded, and variations, along with the concept of pre-exhaust. So I tend to circulate pre-exhaust. I might pre-exhaust someone's bench press for 4 to 8 weeks, and then remove the pre-exhaust for 4 to 8 weeks. And then while kind of modifying that cycle, that wave, we might also maybe pre-exhaust and do an underload variation for 4 weeks. Then we pre-exhaust and do a normal loaded variation for 4 weeks. Then we remove the pre-exhaust and do another normal load variation, because that's a sense of progression by removing the pre-exhaust. And then maybe the 4th week, we again have the pre-exhaust removed, but we go into an overload variation. And then we just repeat that whole cycle again. So it might be something like a 16-week cycle where we go from pre-exhausted underload all the way to not pre-exhausted overload. That pushes and forces adaptations to a superseding amount of what the body's natural abilities are. You start to accumulate nervous system stress, tissue stress, like muscle and connective tissue stress, but then you drop back down to the bottom of that wave. You let the body catch up nervous system recovery wise, while you're still driving the sensation of the need for adaptation. So that might be a neat way to wave that. We don't always do it in 4-week waves, but that's just an example of how you can undulate those waves. Is you have a period of time where you're training with maximum intensity, but at weights that are less than your competition best. Then you have times where you're at your competition best, and then you might have times where you're superseding that and trying to push past that. Now, one of the ways I'll do that with really strong athletes, if we don't want to do an overload variation to risk injury, I might just have them do simple lockout holds. So they might unrack 110% of their 1 rep max, hold it and brace for 10 seconds, and then have somebody help them re-rack it. That would be a simple form of an overload, where it's a nervous system overload just to get them used to picking up that weight. So that way, if they get used to picking up 110% of their max, as our strength develops and we're ready to actually try that to see if it's our new max, it's not the first time they're picking it up. They're already familiar with that feeling. They got over the sensation of that feeling overwhelming and new. So that would be a variation of an overload technique that you would use with somebody who's really strong, because you don't want to go through full range of motion and risk connective tissue injury or stress, or overloading the nervous system too much. So that is tip number 2, is the undulating waves. Then tip number 3 is to address recovery capacity. You can only be as strong as what you can recover from. Often people overtrain their recovery. And this is all you type A, crazy people out there who just want to destroy yourselves in the gym. Totally understand. Do it myself. However, there is a difference between annihilation and optimal. So you can annihilate the concept or the muscle or whatever you're training that day, or you can do what's optimal. I think Lee Haney commented on that in bodybuilding, is that it's not annihilation, it's optimum. And that's what you're looking for in your training. Is we want to train to what we can recover from. How we can improve our recovery is sleep quality. There's a ton of stuff you can do. Number one thing is to try to go to bed at the same time every night. Our circadian rhythm is more so set by when we go to bed rather than when we wake up. So if you try to go to bed at the same time every night, that sets a more consistent pattern for your body. The body likes that a lot better, so you do get better quality of sleep. You also want to have the room at a cool temperature. I forget kind of the Celsius, but I think it's like 18 to 20 degrees Celsius, and then like in Fahrenheit, it's like 65, 70, somewhere in there is usually recommended to be at a good temperature, where it's cool enough that you need a little bit of a light cover, sheet or blanket or comforter to feel truly comfortable. If you can just lay open on your bed, no covering, it's probably too warm. And then the benefit of having that covering on you is it desensitizes the skin. Our skin is alert while we sleep. So if you have a change in air current or something lands on you or touches you, that can alert the system and it can ruin your sleep quality. So those are a couple tips. There's tons of supplements you can use. Melatonin is a good one. You can use, roughly 15-30 minutes before bed to help you get more sleepy. There's other supplements, glycinate, magnesium, other things. But you want to look into sleep quality. You want to maximize sleep quality. Then we want to make sure our nutrition is on point. My gosh, nutrition and sleep are inarguable as to their significance and the impact they can have. So we absolutely need to be monitoring them. For nutrition, tracking daily calories, tracking daily protein, that's basically it. If you track your calories and your protein, you're automatically controlling your carbs and fats, so there's no need to track those. But that's what I have my athletes track, is calories and protein. We also track hydration. We want to make sure the body's hydrated, so that way the muscles are mobile, everything feels good, our digestion quality is really good by being hydrated, so that's a big thing as well. And then stress management. If they have a lot of stress, we want to address that, whether it's just talking through some issues, journaling some issues, brain dumping before you go to bed, proactive planning, saying like, okay, I'm stressed about this, but what can I do tomorrow? What can I do next week? What can I do next month? If you feel like you have a sense of control, or you can have some form of influence on that stress, it can help reduce your stress overall. Then I think from there, it's just consistency. Try to be as consistent with your training days as you can. I've had clients in the past where their work days are a little chaotic. And if you let them go, they might train one week Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the next week Tuesday, Friday, Saturday, the next week Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's like all over the place. So for them, if they have a lift that's the most important, or the one that's either the most taxing on them or they're struggling with the most, I make that one consistent. I'm like, okay, you got to train every Monday, and every Monday we're going to squat. I don't care what happens the rest of the week. I don't care what you do on all the other days. Is Monday we have to squat, which means Sunday we have to take the day off. Now, however you want to get your other workouts in, Tuesday through Saturday, whatever works that week, great. If you get all 4 in, awesome. If we need to combine the last bench day with the deadlift day, this is what it would look like. We'd take this piece and put that into one day. That's fine. That's how we do that. But we build in consistency for that one lift, and that really makes sure that progresses. It also helps really fight off a lot of injuries and acute little annoyances in the body. So those are some tips you can have for improving recovery capacity. The more we can recover from, the more we get to do, and the more progress we get to make. Okay. Now, this was a ton of information. Hopefully it was somewhat helpful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section of whatever you're listening or watching this on. You can also reach out on our website, which is www.c3method.com. It's spelled out THREE, so THREE method.com. I appreciate your time. I hope this was helpful. If you need anything, please reach out. That's it. Okay. Thank you very much.